UVing is a very important part of the 3D modeling process. It is what allows you to texture your model. UVs are the two-dimensional coordinates of your object that will allow it to lie down flat so you can paint over them. To view your UVs, I'm going to change my workspace from the modeling standard down to UV editing. Your layout will change and you will have this new window open that looks like a graph. If you do not have anything selected, your graph will be empty. If you have a default object, have a cube, it will show you the UVs for a cube. If you think of this cube as a cardboard box and these white edges as cuts, which is exactly what they are cut edges, this is how you would cut that cardboard box to make it lay down flat, and this is what I would have. Every face here corresponds to a face on my model. So right here is the top. You can see this is not a bold white edge, neither is this one. And there's a face on either side of them on my UV toolkit, or my UV editor. Where there is a bold white line, there is a face, however not on the UV toolkit. If I hover over this edge, another edge highlights, and that means on the 3D model, these edges are connected. However, to get it to lay down flat, we had to cut it. If I turn on this little checkerboard pattern right here, you can see that it is all nice equal checkers. And this is what you want your UVs to look like, to be as uniform as possible. If I had one face that was very stretched, I would know that there was a problem down here with my UVs because my checkerboard are rectangles instead of checkers. You can select UVs very similar to how you select vertices. If I right click in my UV editor, I'm going to go to UV, and they appear on my model in the exact same place as vertices. However, if I select my object and have my poly count open, you can see that I have 8 vertices, but 14 UVs, which means I have more UVs than I have vertices. So I'm going to select a vertex, and I have one vertex selected, and in the UV toolkit, I have 2 vertices that have highlighted. That is because in the 3D view, this vertex is connecting these edges together. However, the UVs have been cut so it can lay down flat. If I select my UVs, I have one UV here, one UV here, and that makes up this one vertex. So even though they look the same in the 3D viewport, vertices and UVs are different, but they will be in the same location. But you'll have more than one potentially for your per vertex. So I have 2 UVs selected with just this one area highlighted. All objects come with default UVs. Make a cylinder and a sphere. You can see they all have default UVs that they come with. However, you should never leave UVs in their default form. If I hit the checkerboard on the cylinder, you can see it's actually very stretched going all the way around. The top and the bottom look good, but the sides are not. For spheres, spheres are a little bit harder to UV, just because of their shape, and laying down a sphere flat is a little bit tricky. However, when we go over the UVing toolkit, you can improve these default UVs significantly. If we were texturing in Photoshop, we would be able to export these UVs, bring them into Photoshop, and paint directly over them. So if this were a 6-sided dice, we could paint the numbers on all 6 faces, then bring that texture back into Maya, load it in, and if I painted a 1 on this face, a 1 would show up on my texture. I'm going to cheat a little bit and show how UVs affect the object by loading in a texture. So right now I have a dice texture loaded in. I'm going to hit 6 on my keyboard, and you can see that it doesn't really line up. This is the texture that I have, and if you overlay that pattern on it, you can see it's a very similar pattern, however it is rotated from what my default UVs are. I'm going to turn off my checkerboard and turn on this little picture button, and that will show my image in my viewport, in my UV editing viewport. And I can rotate. I right-clicked UV shell, and I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. And it is now much closer than it was before. I have some of the numbers lining up properly with where they should be. However, these two faces are in the wrong position. They should be connected to these edges. And I need to move these faces over. And I'm going to do that by making a cut, which future tutorials will go over. And then selecting these edges and stitching them together. As you can see, I now have these two faces that are looking a little bit better. Generally, you will not start with a texture and then have your change your UVs to match that texture. The normal workflow would be to either export these UVs, bring them into Photoshop, or export your entire 3D model and bring it into a program like Substance Painter where you can paint directly on the mesh. Regardless of the program that you use, you're going to have good UVs, and which means you'll have to go through the UV toolkit, create UVs, do cutting and sewing, unfolding, so you have proper UVs for your mesh. This right here is called the 0 to 1 space because it starts at 0, 0 and goes to 1 and up 1. You have many more graphs than just 0 to 1. However, 3D programs by default will only look right here for texture information, meaning that all of your texture information, all your UVs, must fit into this 0 to 1 space. Even though it looks very small, this size is dependent on what you tell it to be. If you come up to Image, UV Snapshot, I can tell it that this 0 to 1 space is 2048 by 2048, or I can say that it is 512 by 512, or I can say it is a 16K texture map. The size changes depending on what you want. So if I saved out a 16K UV snapshot, brought it into Photoshop, I would have a 16K square UV to paint on. If I'm saving this out to go into Substance Painter, I would not take a UV snapshot. I would just export my model and then tell Substance Painter what the resolution of the texture is. So even though it might look small, all of your UVs for your model should fit inside of this 0 to 1 space. You can have multiple models in the same 0 to 1 space. It is not restricted to just one mesh. You can combine multiple models together and put them on the 0 to 1 space, and that is called texture atlasing, where you have multiple models sharing the same texture.